Hello, everyone, and welcome back to English Talk Sessions. I'm Mia, and here with me, as always, is James. This is episode 5, and we are really glad you are here today.
Hi everyone, James here, and honestly, today's topic is one I feel very personally connected to, so I'm especially excited to talk about this one.
Before we begin, let me quickly remind any new listeners what we do here. English Talk Sessions is a podcast made for beginner and intermediate English learners. We speak slowly, we use simple and clear language, and we talk about things that are real, honest, and actually useful for your English journey. So if you are new, welcome. And if you have been with us since episode 1, thank you. We truly appreciate you.
And as always, don't worry if you miss a word or two. Just keep listening. Your brain is absorbing more than you realize, even when it doesn't feel that way.
In our last episode, we talked about why we feel nervous when we try to speak English and what we can do about it. Today, we are going one step further because after nervousness, there is usually something else that stops learners from speaking, and that something is the fear of messing up.
Yes, and I think for a lot of people, including me, the fear of messing up is actually bigger than the nervousness itself. Nervousness is the feeling before you speak, but the fear of messing up is the thought that says, don't even try, you'll only embarrass yourself.
That's such a clear way to put it. And today, we want to challenge that thought directly because we believe, and we genuinely mean this, that messing up is not just acceptable, it is actually necessary. It is part of the process. And the sooner a learner can accept that, the faster they will improve.
So today's episode is really a permission slip. Permission to make mistakes, permission to sound imperfect, permission to mess up and keep going anyway.
Exactly. So let's get into it. James, I want to start with something simple. Can you think of a time when you messed up in English and what happened afterward?
Oh, there are too many to choose from. But one that comes to mind happened not long ago. I was trying to tell someone that I was very full after eating dinner, and instead of saying I'm stuffed, I said I'm stiff, which means something completely different. The person looked at me very strangely, and I just smiled and nodded and hoped they would move on quickly.
That is such a perfect example. And I love that you smiled and nodded and kept going. That right there is the correct response to a mistake.
I didn't always respond like that, though. In the beginning, I would freeze completely. I would go red in the face. I would apologize 5 times, and then I would avoid speaking English for the rest of the day.
That response is so understandable, and I think most learners go through that exact phase. The mistake feels enormous. It feels like proof that you are not good enough. And so the safest response seems to be stop speaking, hide, and try again some other time.
But that never actually works, does it?
It really doesn't, because the next time comes and the fear is still there. And now it has grown a little bigger because you confirmed it by running away. Avoidance teaches the brain that the situation was truly dangerous, and the brain believes whatever we teach it through our actions.
So every time we run away from a mistake, we're making the next attempt harder.
Exactly. And every time we stay, correct ourselves, smile, and continue, we are teaching the brain something different. We are teaching it, this is safe. I can handle this. A mistake is not the end.
So let's talk about the most common mistakes English learners make, because I think when people hear that certain mistakes are extremely common, it takes away some of the shame around making them.
I love that framing. Yes, let's talk about the most common ones. And I want to start with something almost every learner does in the beginning, which is translating word for word from their first language into English.
I did this constantly, and the result was sentences that were grammatically strange because languages don't work like word-for-word codes. The structure, the word order, the expressions, they're all different.
Exactly. For example, in many languages, you say something like, I have hunger, when you want to say you are hungry. But in English, we say, I am hungry. The meaning is the same, but the structure is completely different. And if someone translates directly, they might say, I have hunger, which sounds unusual to a native speaker.
I've definitely said things like that, and usually the person still understood me, which is the important thing.
And that is the key point. Even a structurally unusual sentence usually communicates the meaning. The other person is not grading you. They're just trying to understand what you mean. And most of the time, they do.
What is another very common mistake you see learners make?
Reflective. One of the most common is mixing up verb tenses, using the present tense when the past is needed or the other way around. For example, saying, yesterday I go to the market, instead of, yesterday I went to the market.
I made that mistake regularly in the beginning, and honestly, sometimes I still catch myself doing it when I speak quickly.
And that's completely normal. Verb tenses take a long time to become automatic. In conversation, our brain is working very fast. We are thinking about the message, the words, the pronunciation, all at once. And sometimes the tense slips. It happens to intermediate learners all the time, not just beginners.
What about mistakes with articles? I find articles incredibly confusing. When to say a, when to say the, when to say nothing at all.
Articles are genuinely one of the hardest things in English because many languages don't have them at all. So learners who come from those languages have to build a completely new habit from zero. And it takes a long time. It is very normal to say, I went to market instead of I went to the market. Or she is doctor instead of she is a doctor. These are extremely common and they almost never block communication.
So, most of the mistakes we make don't actually stop the other person from understanding us.
That is one of the most important things to understand about language mistakes. There is a difference between a mistake that confuses the listener completely and a mistake that sounds slightly unusual but still communicates perfectly. And the vast majority of learner mistakes fall into the second category. They are noticeable, but they do not block meaning.
That is genuinely reassuring, because in my head, every mistake feels like a wall, like the conversation has completely broken down.
But most of the time, the conversation hasn't broken down at all. The other person understood you. The communication succeeded. The only thing that broke was your confidence. And that is a very different problem with a very different solution.
What about mistakes in pronunciation? That's something I worry about a lot, saying a word in a way that sounds completely different from how it should.
Pronunciation mistakes are interesting because they often feel more embarrassing than grammar mistakes. When we mispronounce a word, we can sometimes hear it ourselves, and that is a painful moment. But again, the question is, did the other person understand? And most of the time, they did. Context carries an enormous amount of meaning. If you are in a restaurant and you say something that sounds approximately like chicken, the other person is not going to think you said something completely unrelated.
That's a good point. Context does a lot of the work.
It really does. And pronunciation improves naturally with listening and practice over time. It is not something that can be forced or rushed. The best thing a learner can do is listen to a lot of English in podcasts, in films, in conversations, and let the correct sounds become familiar and then automatic.
Now, I want to talk about something that I think is connected to all of these mistakes, which is the idea of self-correction. When you make a mistake while speaking, should you stop and correct yourself or just keep going?
That is such a practical and important question. And my honest answer is it depends on the situation. In a casual conversation with a friend or a language partner, stopping to correct yourself is completely fine and actually very useful. You say something, you notice it sounds wrong, you say, actually, I mean, and you try again. That kind of self-correction builds strong habits over time.
Candid. But what about in a more pressured situation, like talking to a stranger, or ordering food, or asking for help?
In those situations, I think the most important thing is to keep going. A quick self correction is fine, but spending 30 seconds apologizing and restarting in the middle of ordering a coffee is more disruptive than the original mistake. Say what you can. If they understood, wonderful. If they didn't, they will ask you to repeat, and you can try again with slightly different words.
So the rule is roughly correct yourself when it helps, but don't let the correction become bigger than the conversation itself.
Exactly. The correction is a tool. It should serve the conversation, not interrupt it. And over time, as your English becomes more natural, you will self correct faster and more smoothly, almost without thinking about it. That is a sign of real progress.
Now, I want to talk about something that I think a lot of learners feel but rarely say out loud. Sometimes, after making a mistake in front of someone, the feeling of embarrassment stays for a very long time, much longer than it should, and it affects how you feel about speaking English in general, not just in that one situation.
That is a very real and very honest observation. And I think the reason it stays so long is connected to something we mentioned in our last episode. Our brains hold on to emotional memories, especially ones connected to social situations. Because for humans, being part of a group, being accepted, being understood, these things feel important at a very deep level. And a moment of embarrassment in a social setting triggers that deep level, even when we logically know the mistake was small.
So, our reaction to the mistake is sometimes bigger than the mistake itself deserves.
Almost always. The mistake was one wrong word. The emotional response is 3 hours of replaying the moment and feeling ashamed. That is a very unbalanced equation, and recognizing that imbalance is the first step towards changing it.
How do we actually change it, though? Because recognizing it and actually feeling differently are two very different things.
I think one of the most helpful things is to consciously reframe what the mistake means. Instead of thinking, I made a mistake, therefore I am bad at English, try thinking, I made a mistake, therefore I am practicing English. The mistake is proof of action, and action is the only thing that leads to improvement.
That's a shift from seeing the mistake as a result to seeing it as part of the process.
Exactly. A result is fixed, but a process is moving. A process means you are going somewhere. Every mistake is just a step on the path, not a wall at the end of it.
I also think it helps to remember that the other person in the conversation almost certainly forgot about the mistake much faster than we did. We replay it for hours. They probably moved on within seconds.
That is so true and so important to say. We are always much more aware of our own mistakes than other people are. The other person is focused on the conversation, on what they want to say next, on their own life. They are not replaying your grammar error on repeat.
Okay, I want to talk now about some very practical things our listeners can do this week to get more comfortable with making mistakes. Because I think the theory is helpful, but the practice is what actually changes things.
Absolutely. And I have 3 specific suggestions. The first one is to make a deliberate mistake. I know, that sounds strange, but try this. In a low-pressure situation, say something slightly wrong on purpose. Order your coffee with a small mistake. Mispronounce a word. And then notice what happens. Notice that the world doesn't end. Notice that the other person either still understood you or politely asked you to repeat. That experience of surviving a mistake is incredibly valuable.
I love that idea because it puts you in control. Instead of being afraid of the mistake happening, you choose it, and that changes the emotional experience completely.
Exactly. The second suggestion is to keep a mistake journal. Every day, write down one mistake you made in English, just one, and next to it, write the correct version. This does 2 things. It normalizes mistakes by making them a daily expected part of your learning, and it helps you track your progress because over time, the same mistakes will start to appear less and less.
A mistake journal. I actually really like that. It turns something that feels shameful into something that feels like data, like information you can use.
Exactly. And the third suggestion is to find what I call a mistake safe space. This is a person or a group or even a recording app on your phone where you can speak English freely without any fear of judgment, where making a mistake is not just accepted, but actually expected and welcomed. This could be a language partner, a study group, or simply yourself, talking out loud to your phone every morning for 2 minutes.
That last one, talking to yourself or recording yourself, I've tried it and it does feel strange at first. But it is genuinely one of the best practice tools I've found because you can hear yourself. You can notice things about your own speaking that you never noticed before.
And when you listen back, you will often find that you sound much better than you thought you did in the moment. Because in the moment, we are very focused on our nerves and our mistakes. But when we listen back with a little distance, we can hear the parts that actually worked well.
Now, before we close today, I want to address something directly because I think some listeners might be thinking, all of this sounds good, but my mistakes are different. My mistakes are too big, too frequent, too embarrassing. This advice is for people who make small mistakes, not for me.
And I want to speak directly to that thought because I understand it completely. When we are in the middle of struggling, it can feel like our situation is uniquely difficult, like everyone else is making small, manageable mistakes, and we're making catastrophic ones.
But is that actually true?
It almost never is. The mistakes feel bigger to us than they appear to anyone else, and the frequency feels higher because we notice every single one, while other people only notice a fraction of them. The learner who feels like they make constant terrible mistakes is usually making exactly the same kinds of mistakes as every other learner at their level. They are just paying more painful attention to each one.
So part of the work is actually adjusting our attention. Noticing the mistakes, yes, but not magnifying them beyond what they actually are.
Exactly. Notice, correct when you can, and move forward. That is the whole process, not notice, feel terrible, replay endlessly, avoid speaking for 3 days. That second process doesn't help anyone improve. It just makes the journey much more painful than it needs to be.
I think the most comforting thing I've heard today, and it's something I want to hold on to, is this. The mistake is not the problem. Our relationship with the mistake is the problem. And that is something we can actually change.
That is beautifully said, James. The mistake itself lasts for 1 second. Our reaction to it can last for days, and that reaction is where the real work of language learning happens. Not in perfect grammar, not in flawless pronunciation, but in learning to make a mistake, breathe, correct it if you can, and keep going.
Keep going. I think that is really the core message of today's episode.
It is, and it connects to everything we have talked about across all 5 episodes now. In episode 1, we talked about staying motivated. In episode 2, about building habits. In episode 3, about managing time. In episode 4, about speaking despite nervousness. And today, in episode 5, about making mistakes without letting them stop you. All of these ideas are really about one thing. Keep going. In different ways, through different challenges, the answer is always keep going.
So let me recap what we covered in today's episode. We talked about the fear of messing up and why it is even bigger than general nervousness for many learners. We looked at the most common mistakes English learners make, including word-for-word translation, mixing up verb tenses, confusing articles, and pronunciation errors. We discussed why most mistakes do not actually block communication. We talked about the difference between self-correcting in casual and pressured situations. We explored why the emotional response to a mistake often lasts much longer than the mistake deserves. We talked about how to reframe a mistake as part of the process, not proof of failure. And we shared 3 practical tools: making a deliberate mistake, keeping a mistake journal, and finding a mistake-safe space.
That is a thorough and wonderful summary. And the message I hope every listener takes away from today is simply this. It is okay to mess up. It has always been okay. Every person who speaks English well today has a long history of messing up behind them. You are not behind. You are on the path. And the path includes mistakes. All of them.
Before we go, I want to take a moment to say something to everyone who has been listening to English Talk Sessions. We make this podcast because we genuinely believe that every person who wants to speak English can do it. Not because it is easy, but because with the right mindset, the right habits, and a little patience, it's absolutely possible. And we want to be part of your journey.
If today's episode helped you even a little, please hit the like button. It takes 1 second, and it helps more learners find this podcast and start their own journey. Every like genuinely makes a difference for us.
And please subscribe if you haven't already. We release new episodes regularly, and each one connects to the next. If you subscribe now, you won't miss a single one, and your streak, your momentum, stays strong.
We also have a question for you today, and we would love to read your answer in the comments. The question is, what is the most memorable mistake you have ever made in English? It can be funny, embarrassing, or anything in between. Share it below, because sharing it makes it smaller, and you might just make another learner feel a lot better about their own mistakes.
And if you know someone who's learning English or someone who keeps saying, "I'll start speaking when my English is better," please share this episode with them, because that person needs to hear today's message more than anyone.
Remember, motivation gets you started, habits keep you consistent, time management keeps you focused, courage gets you speaking, and today we add one more. Permission to mess up keeps you going. Hold on to all of these. They are all part of the same journey.
Thank you so much for being here with us today. Take care of yourselves, make some mistakes this week on purpose, and we will see you in the next episode.
Goodbye, everyone, and see you very soon.
Goodbye, and remember, mess up, smile, and keep going.